When you use Google Maps to find the fastest route, when your bank approves a loan, when your hospital manages patient records, or social media platforms suggest content, what do all these systems have in common? They all rely on algorithms. And the word algorithm comes directly from the name of the 9th century scholar Al-Khwarizmi. He was born around 780 CE, and he worked in the legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Iraq. The House of Wisdom was one of the world's greatest centers of learning, where scholars translated, preserved, and expanded knowledge from Greek, Persian, Indian, and Egyptian civilizations. Welcome back to another episode of Chatting with Slava the Jordanian. I'm your host, STJ. And upon request from our favorite scientist, Dr. Ihab Abdurrahim, we decided to dedicate this episode to one of his favorite scientists of all time, Al-Khwarizmi. Thank you, Ihab, for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, where do you want to start?
Well, let's start at the beginning for him. You talked about the algorithm, but he was one of the pioneers of algebra, right? So that's kind of so he was a pioneer in math, obviously, which algorithms are part of that. He did some economics, which we'll talk about, and then he also talked a little about sociology, worked on some sociology. I think he wrote some books on that, but we'll get to that later. But the main the main point I wanted to make is, I think he was one of the people. It's not like he didn't create algebra by himself, but he's one of the pioneers of algebra. And he wrote a book, and I'm just going to read it here in English: The Compendious Book on Calculations by Completion and Balancing, which is basically algebra. When you solve a problem, you're solving for some variable. So and there's a word in there in that, from that translation, algebra, and that's where algebra is derived from. So that's kind of one of the main parts that we wanted to talk about here. And a lot of this, algebra and algorithms, but the algorithms are kind of, for him it was more of a thought process. It wasn't really like, he's not writing an algorithm to write a computer program, right? So a lot of his ideas framed the idea of computer science, artificial intelligence now, and he developed the foundation of modern systems for information and decision making. Again, when you think of an algorithm, it's a path of decision making, and if you were to draw it or write it out, it would be just, again, a thought process. We create algorithms and computer science programs to like Microsoft Word or whatever it might be. These programs are based on algorithms. So I'll give you the floor if you have any. But again, algorithms have a base in mathematics too. So it's not just, but back then he would have never thought of the idea of artificial intelligence or computers or anything like that. But for him, again, like I said, it was more of the solving of a problem using a thought process.
Yeah, so let's start with setting up the timeline for our viewers and our listeners. So he is a 9th century scholar from the Islamic Golden Age who helped create ways of thinking that continue to shape economics, sociology, commerce, governance, and even how societies organize themselves today. So he wasn't just simply solving equations. He was, like you said, he was creating systems to understanding complexity of processes that's around us. So do you agree that most of us think of mathematics? I just want to give a little bit of background. My mom was a math and science teacher, high school math and science teacher. She was the first female out of her town in Slava the Jordan to be granted a full scholarship to go to the AUB University, which is American University in Beirut. And she was supposed to continue after that to go to medical school in Canada, full ride or free ride. So
Right.
a full scholarship from the Jordanian government. So that was a big deal. But my mom was so much into math and science. And she always, the way she taught it, she goes, math runs the world. The world is all numbers, right? So she loved math and physics. Those are the two favorite science avenues that she always read about, taught, spoke about. So do you agree that when most of us think of mathematics, we think of algebra and algorithm and the foundation of modern computing? But what if that, Al-Khwarizmi influence extended far beyond numbers? What do you think about that? Because you did mention that, like I said, he was, he helped create the ways of thinking about, and continues to shape our economics, sociology, commerce, governance, and how actually societies organize themselves today. Do you agree with that statement as a scientist? Do you look at math above and beyond just algorithm and algebra and computing?
So math is more. It's like people look at, like, I look at math as like music, right? It's a musical form that is used to solve anything and everything. We can solve things here on Earth. We can talk about solving quantum mechanics using math. We're talking about the small, the large. We can use math for anything. You can use math to calculate, volcanic eruptions and heat, and there's just so much involved with math that it's so much used in society that sometimes we forget that it is present, right? I mean, you can do a simple, math equation, math problem by, tipping somebody at a restaurant. That's math, right? So that's the simplest forms of math are just numbers, adding, subtracting. But when you get down to like algebra and algorithms, these are very a little more complex, right, than just simple numbers. And the really nice thing about math, and here's something I'm just going to go on a little bit of a tangent. Geometry, for instance, the Greeks were really big influencers in geometry. And when I took geometry, I thought it was only going to be like, it's weird, triangles and angles and things like that. But I believe the second half of the year in geometry were proofs. For interesting, right? Proofs, if you think about it, is a type of algorithm. You can create an algorithm to prove that a right triangle is a right triangle, right? Isosceles is isosceles. So you can go through all this, but people can use algorithms. You can write a program to prove all the proofs that you did in geometry. So again, you can take that geometric mathematics and proofs and put it into an algorithm that you don't even have to do it at your own. You can just plug in the information and out spits out the data, the final answer, which again, somebody had to go through in their minds and write this algorithm that does the proofs for them. Okay. That type of geometry and math. So anybody can write an algorithm, but somebody has to sit down and think it through logically, step by step, right? You're going, is there a right angle? Yes. Then if there's, how do you prove it this way? And you got to go through yes, no, all these yes, no answers. And the answer gets spit out using that algorithm. Simple forms of algorithms, I'm just talking about them right now. But he, again, didn't sit down and say, oh, I'm going to put it into a computer, write an algorithm, and that algorithm is going to become a program, and that program is going to solve something, some equation or whatever it might be. But for him, there's no computers, there's nothing there. For him, it was the thought process of the algorithm of solving. And he did use it in a systematic way to solve problems involving inheritance, taxation, trade agreements, measuring land, and resource allocation. So there's a lot of things he used it for just in his time that he could utilize the algorithm. And again, it's nothing. It's not something outrageous where he's using a computer. He's just thinking through how an inheritance would work. A, B, this is the answer. C, D, this is the answer. So he thought that through, and again, I didn't read through the in-depth taxation inheritance. My guess is he was able to come with some kind of formulation when somebody comes in and has a problem with the inheritance. It'll go through this little kind of tree or root system we'll call it a root system of algorithms to get the answer. So it's a consistent answer for everybody that asks that same question. So it's not, again, this is again a guess. I didn't go in depth, but I'm thinking out loud about how you would utilize it for inheritance. You don't want to be like, you don't want to use your feelings and go, oh, I feel bad for this person. When they ask, oh, I should have gotten this much inheritance. My guess is he came up with a logical way to answer the inheritance questions. So when somebody drops the question in, it goes through like a little pinball machine. And then finally the answer gets spit out at the end for that specific question. So every time they ask that same question, the answer should be the same. So he took out from this problem solving of inheritance, he took out the feeling, he took out probably the religious aspect, I'm guessing. There might be some, I guess there's some Islamic religious inheritance splitting, and he may have put that into the inheritance problem solving algorithm. So again, I'm guessing he did utilize the Islamic inheritance splitting between daughters and sons and mothers and brothers and stuff. So all that discussion in Islam was probably taken and put into some logical, not mathematical, but logical problem solving, so he can come out with this, utilize this algorithm. So every time you put the information in, it utilizes the information from Islam and puts out the answer, is my guess for inheritance. And again, you can go through taxation and come up with the same idea. Again, it's a thought process problem utilizing data and information that's given to us through for example, Islam for inheritance. And I'm guessing the same. There's also, I believe there's in Islam, there's rules and laws of taxation. So again, take that information and put in some kind of a thought process algorithm. So it kind of, you don't have to read all the words. You just kind of utilize this algorithm and kind of gives you the answer every time.
So I have some questions for you. And please, I apologize for my ignorance as far as the subject. So when a scientist or a mathematician creates an equation and you plug in whatever you need to plug in and through the equation so you can spit out the answer, is that the same thing as computing, or that's a completely different thing?
100% is computing.
This is computing. Okay.
Yeah. So imagine this. We're talking about inheritance, right? Give me some of the laws. You probably know them better than I don't know them very well. What's the inheritance split for a daughter versus a son, for instance?
I don't judge me on that. It's been a while. I used to know it very, very well.
What you remember.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it will be half and quarter, if I'm not mistaken.
So the son gets half and the daughter gets a quarter.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the other quarter goes to the wife. I'm not sure. Possibly. And I remember a lot of the Arab societies right now, they're very secular, more than very, other than.
Let's utilize that. Let's utilize that thought process. Half to the sons. Now here's the really cool thing, right? So half to the sons. Let's say there's 2 sons, and you got to split that half into the 2, right? And you got 2 daughters. You got to split the quarter into 2, and then the mother's easy. She's 1, right? So she's a quarter, right?
Unless he has another wife and another family, right?
And there you have it. This is where it's beautiful. This is beautiful. We're talking about an algorithm. We're just creating an algorithm right now. We're talking about it. We're talking through the logic behind it. Now it gets more complex when you say, there's another wife. There's another son over there. And it's like, well, where does it go? Now it's instead of half here, you're going to have to split that half, quarter here to this family, quarter there to that family with the sons, right? So when we're talking about this, all this is math, right? And he probably came up with an algorithm where he has I'm thinking he has everything put out into that thought pattern. 1 wife, 1 family, 2 wives, 2 families, right? This wife died. Where does that go? Where does the money go there? From that, when that wife died and he has the other wife alive, but he's got kids over here, where does the money go? Right? So there's rules, right? All these rules. If we put all these rules, everything he did for inheritance, we can take this thought process we're coming up with now. We put that in. That's a computer program.
Yeah, it's not only the rules, but also don't forget there are a lot of variables, right?
Right.
Also that you have to plug in. What if let's say he has 2 wives, one wife, the first wife didn't have sons. The second wife had a son, and the first wife had 3 daughters. The second wife that had a son, she is not alive. She's deceased. So there's so many different variables because Islam allowed 4 wives, whether they are, alive or, still alive or not, or Go ahead.
So what you just said was what you just said, if there's this, then there is that. That's called an if-then statement in a computer program.
No.
Yeah. So
it exists?
Of course. So this is when you write a computer program. People don't go in writing they go, I'm going to go type the program like tick, 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 tick on a computer. They have to come up with this flowchart algorithm of if-then statements. If this, then that. If this, then that. Yes, no. Okay. So it's if you look at somebody who writes a program, that's kind of what they're thinking about in their head, right? You have to have if and then, yes and no. It's a It's not like, it doesn't just go one way or another. You have to think of every single, option, variable that could happen. And the inheritance thing is simple and probably difficult in a way, because if if you're allowed 4 wives, it becomes very tricky, and how things are split, especially if some of the wives have died and then some have, you might have daughters on one side, sons and daughters. It's like, think about all the combinations of that. So if he thought this through correctly, it was a computer program he wrote that had to be on paper, right? It had to be all written out, and it had to make sense that when you have 2 wives versus 1 wife, we got to figure out what the inheritance split is, So it becomes very complex in a way when you're living in 700 AD, right? Or 750 AD, right? So it's, you got to,
780 CE.
780. Yeah. So it's a time when there's no computer. So everything's on paper, and you have to write down every single path that could be possible. And that it would be so much easier if there's only 1 wife, and that would be great. But the 4 wives are cause a little bit of a complex thought process problem. And if he had a computer back then, he would take that algorithm he wrote and he would code it into a computer. It would be a beautiful thing. He would just say 2 wives, 2 kids. He would just put the thing into the computer and it would spit out the percentages for him.
Yeah.
But
So basically, he helped build the intellectual bridge between the knowledge and the practical application. Then he had the knowledge, and we needed a practical application, which I call it the Islamic law, because you have to abide by Islamic law because you are living in the Islamic golden age. But it's what fascinates me, Ihab, that the Islamic Empire wanted to, or was willing to, build on the fundamental principles of Islam to make life a better place, or make people lifestyle, or elevate people's lifestyle, because we want to do better. We want to be fair to everybody. We want to evolve. We want to be a lot more progressive. So somebody like Al-Khwarizmi came along. I believe he was by God's will planted back then in 70, 80 CE to help the Islamic Empire to, progress, go through progress and develop better, like you said, equations, systems that will, solve or champion the challenges, but solve the problems that the empire was having. Because remember, that always I like to reflect on history. It is plugged into the fact that the Islamic Empire was expanding. So you have this, Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, hikmito, and the law and God's law, the application of God's law, the execution of God's law. But that was very narrow into the Arabian Peninsula. So when you tell Arab, this is the law, okay, I'm going to follow it. But then you extend into India and China, North Africa, Spain. You are dealing with so many different cultures. So you had to use people like Al-Khwarizmi and said, hey, we are abiding by the fundamental principles that Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, taught us, but we need to build on that. But the fact that they were able to make that leap of faith and to build upon it, that's very, very progressive, don't you think?
Very, very much so, because when you think about it, it's when people inheritance, right? It was probably pre-Islam. Even after Islam, if you're not in the Islamic Empire or you're not Muslim, you probably are fighting over your inheritance. This is mine. This is, people are killing people for it. It happened. People would
100%.
kill people for inheritance. It's wild.
100%. It's still
But
going on. I have
yeah,
sat through inheritance fights in Jordan in the
yeah.
80s.
And it's
It
weird. You
was
have
barbaric.
the rules. The rules are there.
They
The
are
rules.
there, but see, they're all because in Jordan they still have the tribal law. So you have the option to use a constitutional law or the tribal law. And the tribal law is tribal. It is Islamic, but it's above and beyond the Islamic law. The tribe have created their own laws and expectations, and they expect you to abide by it. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. Come in.
Yeah, I think that's why United States, for instance, separates, and they don't have tribes here, so it separates, the religion from the laws, so they don't mix. So there are laws that are created about inheritance. So if somebody doesn't write a will, for instance, then it falls into courts, and the courts they'll take, who's alive from the family, and then the brother, like say a mother dies, and that's the last living parent. So you have the siblings, and let's say two of the siblings are dead, but they had children. Now, how do we split the money to them? So let's say, let's do it even. They had 4 siblings, and the mother died. Each one gets 25%. Now, 2 of the siblings are dead. Those 25% of each sibling goes to their kids. And if they have more than one kid, it's split the 25%. Let's say there's 2 kids into 2. So it's going to follow some logical pattern. And that's how the laws kind of work typically in the United States. So, but these ideas or these algorithms that were utilized for inheritance, taxation, even like taxation, right? It could be arbitrary. I'm going to tax the heck out of this group because I don't like them.
Or because I can.
Because I can.
Yeah, but see, he probably looked into that in a way that, well, you can't just tax people because a couple of things are going to happen. And we've seen it through history. People are going to leave because they don't want to pay taxes. People are going to lose their business. So where's the economy, right? People are going to starve, right? And then that it's going to fire back at you. People are going to, turn to crime, corruption. And then before you know it, you have this, turmoil of a society that's just scary and dangerous and, and no progress, and just stagnant, right? So probably he came up taxation with problem solving like taxation to make sure that the society stay healthy, make sure everybody has equal opportunity, make sure everybody is able to get education, to get a career, to own their own business.
I'll give you an example.
The balance. Go ahead.
Well, here's an example. So you have an Islamic empire, right? You have Christians living there. You have Jewish people living there, right?
Atheists, even.
Atheists. Mm-hmm. How do you? Okay, there in Islam, there's a form of taxation, right? In Islam, but they tax Christians and atheists, whoever, a different tax, right? I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
If you're Muslim, you pay a certain tax, and then if you're Christian or non-Muslim, you pay a tax. But the tax they created for non-Muslims wasn't some outrageous, like where it would like ruin people. It's reasonable. It's not like so. I can't remember the taxation in Islam what it was. Let's say I think it's kind of on the order of 1%, I believe.
Yes,
something like that.
Yes.
And I think they charged non Muslim 2%. I think that's what it was. It wasn't like 1% and 30%. It'd be ridiculous. So somebody came up with an idea where it's not like you're not gouging people. So, but you're charging I can't remember why the reason they charge them a little bit more because
I think part of it because they needed more protection. Part of
Something,
it,
yeah. There's, yeah.
part of it need more protection. Part of it because remember, as a Muslim merchant or a Christian merchant or a Jewish merchant, they are selling different products and different goods. So maybe the goods are a lot more expensive, or they come from very far away. For example, in Islamic Empire, they will not do alcohol, right? But Christians drink wine, during the church ceremony, communion and stuff. Maybe the wine has to come from somewhere that's a little bit more expensive, stuff like that. It's very detailed. I used to know all this when I was in high school in Saudi Arabia, because as you know, Saudi was huge on Islamic laws in Islamic history. But we'll definitely need to come back, Ihab, and do an episode and brush on it, just to shed some light on how progressive they were in their law. But isn't it fascinating to you as a scientist that his methods actually helped transform economic activity from, just guesswork into structured analysis? I mean, and you are fascinated. You're so passionate about economics, and you do trade in the stock market. But how do you feel when you hear somebody like Al-Khwarizmi from Baghdad, Iraq, in 780 actually, created those financial models that it's our spreadsheets these days are based on?
Yeah. So one of the big things he really thought about in economics was supply and demand, right? So when your supply is high, that's a good thing. Everybody's happy. Prices are low. But when your demand is high and your supply is low, you have a high demand, low supply. That means the price of these goods are going to be more expensive. So what happens then is, those that have more money can buy, let's simplify it, like certain fruits, right? That, if you have a mango and it's call it 10 cents, and everybody has plenty of money at that level to buy it. So the supply is high, and that means people can buy. But once everybody demands this mango, and then trading and coming in, you can't bring in that many mangoes, right? That means the price goes up because demand is high, and because the supply is low and prices go up. That means it cuts out people from purchasing. So these are the things he worked on the supply demand side of economics that are really very interesting. And again, it kind of probably goes into the trade agreements, and he had, again, supply and demand is a very simple idea, but it drives everything typically. And I think he was one of the ones that really thought about this a lot.
Let me ask you a personal question. Now, you grew up, your education is here in the US. As a scientist with a PhD in physical chemistry, do you wish that you would have had some kind of a glimpse of the, Islamic Empire impact on science, just like what you are learning right now? So your knowledge of that came in the later part of your life right now, I think, because marrying me and being with me and going back, and you're like, oh, you send me some, Instagram posts. It's like, did you know this? Like, oh yeah. So for us, Al-Khwarizmi and, and other scientists and other poets and artists, for me, it was just you knowing about Tesla or Einstein, and that's when you talk to me about, those are brilliant minds. Talk to me about those, and I can see the admiration in your eyes and the respect in your voice, and I hear respect in your voice towards those scientists. And that's when I said, it's like, did you know, have you heard? And you're like, yeah, I kind of heard, but I don't know much about them. Do you wish that your knowledge had some kind of or part of what the Islamic scientists have achieved back then?
Again, are you asking me that? Do I wish I was exposed to it earlier on in my life?
Yes.
Yeah, it would have been it would have been great that here's the thing. I wish I was exposed to it as I was learning it. So when I learned algebra, I wish somebody told me, or made a really point. Maybe they said it and I wasn't paying attention because it was just like brushed. Oh, this guy created it and let's go on. But I wish somebody would have said, hey, algebra, here's the history of algebra. It went, from this Islamic scholar, and you had some, Indian scholars, so there's, it wasn't just one person, it was multiple people. It would have been nice to hear the history, because then when you hear the history, it's like, oh, this is great. You start paying more attention to the math in school. When somebody gives me history on something, like when I learned, kind of things in physics, quantum mechanics, it was nice to hear before you talk about Niels Bohr, or how Bohr looked at the atom, right? His how he kind of explained how the atom worked. Where, the electrons are on the neutrons and the protons and so on and so forth. What was really neat with the physics, when I learned that, they taught us about Niels Bohr and, who he was and kind of his background and how his information flowed into the next scientist, and what, kind of you end with Schrodinger, right? Schrodinger's equations on quantum mechanics, which is kind of probably, you're getting to the final, more realistic, explanation of quantum mechanics. But it's, again, it went from one scientist to another scientist. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and Heisenberg, right? So who is he? He was German. He was, and you went through back and forth. Albert Einstein, you just kind of, you think this through, and it's nice to hear the progression of one scientist, then the next one builds on it, the next one builds. So then when you're looking at these, different scientific theories of quantum mechanics, it makes sense because there's a story behind it, right? But when you just kind of say, here's algebra, boom, solve for this, solve for that, whatever, great. So you just it's just mechanical. You're kind of going in and solving for X or something, and X and Y. And, like, for example, quadratic equations and algebra, it was not Al-Khwarizmi. He didn't come up with it. It was another scientist. I believe he was Indian. I can't remember, but quadratic equations were not him. But again, it's building upon the algebra that he came up with.
Well, don't forget, Al-Khwarizmi, even the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Iraq, all their knowledge and all their, expansion on that knowledge is by translating, right, from the Greeks and the Persian and the Indian and the ancient Egyptian civilization. So my question is, that's what sometimes keeps me up at night, Ihab. And maybe you are so logical, I might be a little bit emotional about it, but why did the West kind of halted that, transfer of power from the ancient knowledge? It's almost like the Greeks and the Greeks. You hear a lot about it. Even back in Saudi Arabia, we used to learn about them. Mm-hmm. But when I went to college here in the United States, and when you study like ancient civilization, they kind of skip over the golden age of the Islamic Empire. It's almost like, no, you don't have to worry about it. But there's, when you get older and you reflect on that, what you learned in college is like, okay, there's a gap here, because where does that fit in the timeline that I was taught the progression of, scientific, innovation or like taxation, sociology, psychology. They knew all that stuff. Why do you think, from your logical point of view, or Ihab the logical, why did they do that? And that, can you imagine, and I say that all the time, can you imagine where humanity would be if we built upon that?
Yeah. I don't want to say that we didn't build upon, it's funny. So a lot of the European scientists did build upon, what the Islamic scientists had come up with or created, or I don't want to say they came up with things on their own. Sometimes there was some Indian scholars pre-Islam that they took in, right? Greek, right? We don't want to forget the Greeks. So this information was there, absorbed by those in the Islamic Empire, the scientists, the mathematicians, and they just kind of moved it along and added to it, or made it more maybe in algebra there was some things, but then he wrote a book about algebra, right? So it kind of really brought everything together, including some of the old ideas and some of the new ideas. And that algebra was probably taken by the Europeans and they added to it. Now, here when I learned things in school, the people from the Islamic Empire were never mentioned. It was just
why. Even Persia.
I don't know.
So hold on a second. Have you ever heard, and when you're in graduate school or even undergrad, learning about history, have you ever heard about Persian scientists?
No,
never.
No, because when you're all the scientists that we learned about, that at least I got exposed to, were all European scientists, and nobody discussed. And there's some big Persian scientists. There were some big Indian scientists too that
Absolutely.
were really, really amazing. So I don't want to I don't want to say that it was just they cut out only Islamic scientists or mathematicians.
No, but you always, that's not
but they cut out everybody. They cut out everybody.
Except for the Greeks. You always hear the Greek. The Greek. You know what I'm saying? Now, the new generation is demanding to know the whole truth. Don't leave anybody behind. Even with Egyptian civilizations, I think because when England, tapped into the discovery of all, the civilization advancement of ancient Egyptian, because they had the advantage of taking that back to England to learn from it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, and also from India too, but for Persia and the Islamic Empire, it's just like they muted that, completely muted, like, no, don't worry about it. There's nothing there. Move on, kind of thing. But, how does that make you feel as a scientist? For me, as somebody in the healthcare, as a healthcare professional, and going back and rereading and relearning and rekindling my knowledge about, medicine, dentistry, in these ancient India and Persia and during the Islamic Golden Age, it's fascinating. A lot of the stuff we are using today in dentistry is based on that knowledge. So why in dental school, there's no politics in academia, right? I hate to say there should not be any politics in academia.
Right.
History is history. Yeah. It did exist. We have proof. We are the proof of the existence of this civilization, because what we know, the knowledge what we know now, is built upon that. So how can you skip that? That's what how I feel about it. How do you feel about that as a scientist?
Again, I wish it was part of the conversation when we learned whatever it might have been, the math, the science, chemistry, physics. There were things, there's some great Islamic chemists, and I never heard of them. And I think it's not advantageous for people not to learn. You need to learn these things, because the history of the background of that science or that math or whatever it might be, it would help you understand how chemistry got to this point, how physics got to this point. Because we can't just jump from Albert Einstein to all the guys that did all the quantum mechanics, right? Because he did relativity. So you can't just go, what was before Albert Einstein? Well, you kind of talk about them in school, right? But what's before that person, right? But then we don't go back far enough, because they think that if you go back, possibly this is the reason, if you go back too far, you're kind of just, all you're doing is having a history lesson on chemistry. And maybe they should have that. I don't know. That's something maybe they should have.
Well, that's my next question to you. Do you believe that young scholars, in graduate school or even undergrad, they are pursuing science or they're passionate about science? Do you think they should know where science comes from? I mean, science is all around. Discovery of science comes from, and why is that important in your opinion?
I think they should, and I think people now in this time, this kind of time and age.
Well, now information is all over. You can go on social media.
Yeah, I think now people kids in school will be very interested in that, versus like when, example. I'll give you an example. Here's a really good example. You had some amazing Black scientists.
Absolutely.
Well, we're not going to talk about them 60, 70 years ago because they're Black, right? Well, they're kind of, that's not good, right? Why are we hearing, because, this is what was going on in the United States, right? So we're not going to talk about that. But now they're talking about it, right? You're learning about these scientists. There's a great movie about the female scientists that helped, and they're a group of Black females, mathematicians, I believe, with NASA, and they were the ones that did the calculations.
Yeah, in the moon. Between 1940s, late 40s, early 50s. Yeah, a great movie. Oh my God, I can't even remember the name. I'll put it in the description for you guys if anybody wants to check it out. But that would be a great episode. I think we should do that, because United States alone had a lot of African American brilliant minds that were kept in the dark, behind the scenes, but their contribution, revolutionized a lot of the things that we are enjoying right now and benefit from whether science, medicine, biology, math. I agree.
I mean, another great example is, women back before, female scientists are now are big. It's as you have equal number of female to male scientists, right? You had those scientists, 100, 200 years ago, but they couldn't say anything because they're women, right? Because you can't, it's the same idea. It's that male dominance thing that, I think Marie Curie was one of the scientists. She's the one that, and that's why the form, I think Curie is like a form of a radiation, unit or something, is named after her. But I believe, if I remember correctly, she had to either go through her husband or something, and she wasn't given the proper, like,
recognition.
She's the one that came up with a lot
because the law in the Western world, not in the East, the law in the Western world was, it doesn't really, if you are not a male, you will never, white male, you will never get credit for any achievement. And if you want to be recognized for any achievement, you got to use the white man as a vehicle to get you some kind of acknowledgement or credit, to get a tip. It's like, okay, there's your tip, but you cannot build a career. They are brilliant in Europe. We're not saying, in the United States, even in Europe, there are brilliant minds of brilliant female minds that contributed to even their legal system, contributed to the legal system, contributed to their, police, laws, crime laws, the court system, but they will never give them credits until, later in life, the new generations, like, hold on a second. That is so wrong. If these people or these women or these minority people contributed to this life that I'm enjoying and I'm privileged to be living, they should be getting the credit. But, that's one world. But when it comes to science, I'm surprised, I'm surprised that as a scientist, even back then during the 18th century, even the 19th century, they never actually revolted against that. Well, hold on a second. What we know right now, we build upon it. What we know right now, it goes back to crediting somebody that is, an Indian scientist or African scientist or Persian scientist or an Arab, is like, well, the Islamic Empire had all kind of different races. It was just a melting pot back then. But it was under the blanket of the golden age of the Islamic world back then. Sure. But it makes me sad that these, historical figures that changed the world. And I believe, I don't know, I'm just, my conspiracy theory that they were time travelers, as you know, I think those brilliant minds above and beyond anybody can understand, or even comprehend. They were like time travelers that were put on Earth to help us advance. And we ended up, canceling them, or it's like, no, we don't want to listen to them. We're going to start all over. We just regressed and then built upon that. But it is sad, but I'm glad that the new generation is waking up to the fact that no, we want to know where we came from. We want to know how we got here. And on top of that, they feel it's just a part of humanity to give a credit to.
I mean, I'll give you, we'll take us back to, Al-Khwarizmi, his ideas in mathematics, he used it in for economics, commercial mathematics. I have it here. It's really interesting. Business partnerships, right? He introduced, equations to determine profit sharing, distribution of salaries, all that. That's really neat, right? Well, if you were to look this up, he wouldn't be given credit for that. It would probably be some European person that wrote an economics book or something like that, or an American or whatever it might be, right? The other thing is, we were talking about Islamic law. It actually is exactly what I was talking about. He applied math utilized by judges and administrators to fairly execute wills, distribute estates, and calculate dowries. That's your algorithm. That's what we just talked about. I mean, I was just thinking about this, and it's here. This is exactly what he did. And he also detailed how mercantile, right, trade transactions require evaluating quantity and cost, His formula balanced variables to calculate unit price and total cost quickly. So these are things that are very deeply ingrained in our, business partnerships, ideas of how to balance, unit pricing and total costs of goods, right? And
you do that every day in
we
our
do it
company, in
all the
our
time.
brand. Yeah.
All the time. We do it all the time. We don't think about it. It's, I didn't know he did this. I just, I'm utilizing something that I learned here in the United States without any background on it. And maybe somebody mentioned to me that these ideas were written by some, European scholar or American scholar, whatever it might be. So we forget. I mean, even dentistry, right? We talk about dentistry. We forget that ancient Egyptians were doing dentistry.
Absolutely. They were doing root canals.
Yeah. Get out of
canals.
here.
How?
Get out of here with that stuff. Come on.
How?
Like
I don't even do root canals with
but
my
what
microphone.
did you learn about
No.
ancient Egyptians doing in your
not in NYU.
dental school?
No.
How did you learn? Who taught you, like, where you were talking about root canals? Where do root canals, who did it? Like, did they say who came, or they just taught you root canals, how to do a root canal? And
So the only thing, so it's all about gross anatomy, right? Because you learn about, dissecting a tooth, dissecting the human body, and so forth and so on. So as far as we went, it was during the 19th century, when the laws in Europe, especially the UK, England, the laws allowed medical doctors to do autopsies because it was against the law to do autopsies. And then when disease and famine, and not famine, but disease and the plague and scientists and doctors, we need to understand what's going on in order to help people. Like, how do we want to prevent something like that, catastrophic thing to happen, to, wipe out, so many hundreds of thousands of people. Then that's when they pushed and pushed and pushed and lobbied for, please allow us to do a autopsy. Please allow us to dissect. And then they said, okay, fine, limited, right? Limited, permission to dissect a body. Otherwise, you just have to bury it right away. When that happened, we start dissecting, somebody was specialized in internal medicine, urology, cardiology, neurology, and then the mouth, of course. And then, but I did not learn that ancient Egyptians actually had dentistry. Probably a couple of years ago, before I start, we traveled to Egypt. So,
right.
So for me, I always wonder, how did the humans knew about, toothache or decay? They did fillings in ancient Egyptian time. Come on. What did you put in the tooth in order to guarantee that the prognosis, is solid, that you're gonna, how did you drill a tooth without mechanics?
Exactly.
How did you clear out decay? We do a filling and the patients still come back to us like, I'm sensitive to cold, I can't chew on this side. How did the ancient Egyptians do it? I have no idea, but it will be really nice, and I'm sure we should do an episode about that, Ihab, just like medicine alone, and how we built upon this knowledge. All right, we are getting to the end of our episode. What's last words, Ihab?
Well, I really want to kind of dig deeper into some of these Islamic scientists, but it's going to be great. We should do the episode, like you mentioned, about female scientists. We don't have to talk about just Islamic female scientists. We can talk about just female scientists, the persecution of female scientists over the years, over time, and people that were persecuted for the color of their skin, and their scientists. And let's not forget also the scientists that were executed during Christianity.
The Inquisition.
In the Inquisition.
How much knowledge did we
with
lose?
Ideas. You know, like Galileo, that's a great scientist. They never executed him because he was a very good speaker, and he kept himself around circles that of wealthy people. So his ideas of the earth is not the center of the universe and the sun is, and these things are very they're groundbreaking, but they were executing people for saying things like this. But he wasn't, because he just knew how to play the game in a way. And he got lucky that he wasn't. But again, it's not always, females, color, skin. It's religion too that mutes us as scientists and kept like you were asking, why weren't things progressing, from the ancient times to now? Well, because you have religions that are killing people for coming up with these ideas
and canceling.
Yep, canceling. And when you cancel these ideas, you have people that have ideas that don't even want to speak up, right? So you're kind of killing your think tank that you would have if you were open to the ideas. But again, it was something that was it happened that way because of religion. So it's funny, humans, the way we do things and the way we think about, when we're afraid of saying, oh my God, that, the earth is round, or, it kind of rotates around the sun, and, we have a solar system. People are afraid to make those comments because maybe they're religiously inclined not to.
Well, right? They're being judged. So it's witchcraft, it's heresy.
Yeah.
How can you go, and I said it in so many different episodes. God created everything. All we're doing is discovering it. It's there. It's out there since the beginning of time.
Atoms were there 200-300 years ago. We just didn't know about them.
So scientists, the discoverers, these are just people. They are a vehicle of translating what's out there. Right. But unfortunately, the human mind, like somebody like Galileo, Da Vinci, Al-Khwarizmi, Umar al-Khayyam, other scientists from, like I said, Persia and India and ancient Egyptians, they were beyond their time. And the human mentality is, you are always fearing what you don't know and you don't comprehend. Ooh, that's so scary because I don't understand. If I don't understand it, I don't want to deal with it. If I don't want to deal with it, I can't process it. If I can process it, I want nothing to do with it. But that's the human mentality. But can you imagine if we actually encourage people or humans back then to just expand? Because if I'm living in an empire back then, I rather expand through knowledge than by force. You know what I'm saying? Spread the knowledge.
I think our future episodes, we can have several. I think one of them should be focused on female scientists.
Absolutely.
Maybe one focused on dentistry, one focused on African American scientists that were not given recognition, and now maybe
American female scientists. How about that? Yeah.
And then we can, I was thinking, let's take let's say algebra. We're talking about algebra right now. Let's take algebra really from its origin, when it was really thought about at its infancy, going through all the way through the Islamic Empire, and maybe, later. And let's do that timeline of algebra. For instance, we can kind of we can do whatever we want, but, there is always a progression and a building upon something, and this will be really a different episode, because if we're talking about algebra, it could be the whole episode about algebra. We just talked about algebra half of this episode, but like if you have like 5, 6 scientists involved in algebra, and I think there were about 4 or so or 5 involved in the kind of the progression of algebra, that's a great, because then you can talk about how they did it, what they were thinking, right?
Yeah.
And then what year it was. And then the next one, a couple hundred years later, they took this Indian scientist, for instance, information and did this with it. And then they took the Islamic, took this with, and you kind of just keep going with it. So this could be just one mathematical idea, algebra, right? Science, one type of science, one type of chemistry. Quantum mechanics is a good one. There's a lot of scientists involved in quantum mechanics.
Well, I'm sure geography, astrology,
everything,
navigation, aviation. I mean, there's gonna be. I mean, it's limitless. But you promise you're gonna come back?
Yeah, we'll do it. Let's do it. Yeah,
okay.
I agree.
All right,
ready to come back? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
And I agree with you. I think it's going to be multiple episodes. We have reached the end of our hour. As a reminder, these episodes are uploaded weekly on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube by the Mindset Mastery Moments. If you have enjoyed this, please like, share, and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss any episode, and it's free. This community is sponsored by humanity and supported by everyday people stories. So please find us, join us, support us, and as always, be kind. Thank you for watching and listening. Hope to see you next time. This is Slava the Jordanian.